Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I am the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. It is 12 in the morning. My brain has been poisoned by Twitter today, so apologies for the insane introduction, but here's something I won't apologize for: today's interview, because it's great and it's a wonderful guest. That's right, TV writer Josh Siegal. If you don't know who Josh is, why don't I read you his bio right now. Originally from Niskayuna, New York, Josh took a non-traditional route into TV writing, but that route led to some amazing jobs on shows like Viva Variety, the original UCB sketch show, Crossballs, Monk, 30 Rock, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Great News, and currently The Good Place, which is just about finishing up its final season on NBC. I think episode 11 or 12 airs tonight or tomorrow night. I forget. I watched it on Hulu the next day, so no longer know when shows air, really. But I met Josh out here. Him and Naomi worked on Great News together, and I met him at a couple of the functions, and he was just the nicest dude. He's so talented, so open. We really get into it in this episode, and so I hope you enjoy it. By the way, if you do enjoy it and you want to check out other episodes of the show, you can do so at Spotify, or if you want to download them, they're all available at beginnings.libsyn.com. Of course, the last 100 are on whatever podcast app you use. Now, what I like to do in the beginning here is recommend a couple episodes based on who the guest is. So, Josh is a TV writer. What about other TV writers that have been on the show? You might be interested in these interviews. Damon Lindelof, that was great. Just finished watching Watchmen, and it was so good. It reminded me that you can add themes into your TV shows. It can be a little more than just plot and character. Who else? Jane Espenson. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic writer, goes back to Buffy and Angel. Alison Tatlock from Halt and Catch Fire and also Better Call Saul. Wrote one of my favorite episodes of Better Call Saul. Amy Annie Obi of Insecure and Two Dope Queens. Cord Jefferson, also from The Good Place. Jessica Gao from Rick and Morty and Corporate. And a ton of other writers from most of your favorite shows. Oh, why? In fact, I just talked to Jim Gavin a couple months ago, the creator of the canceled too soon Lodge 49, one of my favorite shows of the last couple years. So check out those episodes. Check out all the talks that I've done with musicians and artists and comedians. And if you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts and on Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, a bunch of other places. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckerman. All right, I think that's about it. The 10th anniversary of the show is coming up in less than 2 weeks, and I have a special interview that will drop on that day, on the 26th. So look out for that. Otherwise, thanks for listening. I gotta go to let Mabel out. She is scampering around the studio, trying to get out to get to her bully stick. So I'll do that while you listen to this interview with Josh Siegal. This week is my goal to find a therapist out here finally.
Oh, there you go.
I've been out here 2 years, and I'm like, all right, now's the time to get serious about everything.
It's a real journey. I found a great one, and I've been so excited. She's the best. I'll give you her name after if you want to give it a shot. She's great with like creative types and all sorts of like, you know, the crazy odds and ends that you deal with in Los Angeles, and she's the absolute best. But to find her, you know, you have to, you know, kiss a few frogs or whatever. And you learn that like LA is, of course, you know, chock full of all sorts of different kinds of therapists. And, you know, I met a couple where afterwards, and I would have been like, you know, after I met my therapy journey was in New York. I had someone about 10 years ago, and she like looked like the kind of therapist you would see on like an episode of Transparent or something. She just totally looked the part. She's like this older woman, a lot of like flowy blouses and scarves and stuff like that. And I was like, all right, this seems fine. She's doing it. But it wasn't like that productive. And then I met somebody in LA because I scheduled for like, you do these like first date sort of therapy things. And the first one I met, I was like, yeah, she seems fine. And then my buddy encouraged me. He's like, no, you'll know if it's the right person. I was like, I don't know, but fine. And then I had a phone session with the person I ultimately went with. And she's like, you know, tell me what's going on, why you want to see a therapist. And I talked for like 10 minutes or something. And then she said, well, it sounds like maybe this is happening for you. And I immediately started sobbing in Trader Joe's parking lot. And I was like, okay, yeah, you get me, you get something. And I was like, I'd never had that experience before. Literally, she said one sentence. So I was like, wow, okay. Yeah, and she's like part of the family now. You know,
that's like our couples therapist.
Yeah.
We have had him for years now, and even when we moved out here, we still Skype with him on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
Because he's so good. Because it basically, there's no like major problems for us, but it's always like, well, trouble translating between me and Naomi.
Of course.
So he's just like, well, Naomi, you're really saying this, and Andy, you're really saying this. And we're like, yeah, I guess you're right.
I guess that's what we're saying. You're right.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll be like, I don't think so.
No, of course, yeah. But that's part of the process too, is that like which things rise to the level of you needing to correct yourself and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Great.
I find like therapy is like, with a therapist, they're just testing little hypotheses. They'll like throw them out, and if it you just kind of like check it within your gut, and you're like, does that resonate?
Yeah. Or you're right. Exactly. Yeah. You know, my therapist is big on saying, you know, what's coming up for me as you're saying this is this, and it's all very like, you know, it's up to you to say. I think one of the big problems with my original therapist was I was so in the dark about like things that were going on with me and whatever, that, you know, when she would say stuff, I would say, sure, that seems right. Yeah, thanks. And I think in hindsight, I should have been like, close, but, you know, good. You're on the green, but I think, you know, but I didn't know that was my job to say like close, but not quite, you know, and now it's a dialogue, which is great.
Well, I wonder if we had similar upbringings because you're from upstate New York.
Yeah.
I'm from Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I feel like they are similar environments or contexts. My brain's moving a little slow, by the way.
No.
Because at last night at 1:30 in the morning, our doorbell rang.
Oh, and a living nightmare. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And my brain ran through so many scenarios.
Yeah.
About like, first of all, I didn't know whether it was the back porch or the front door. So I started to think about like, well, how many doors are between us and the outside? If they can get through the first one, then and then it rang again like a couple minutes later, and all the like kind of like home invasion scenarios started to play out.
I know I'm going to be murdered, but how will I be murdered? Yeah.
So forgive me if I'm grasping for the wrong word.
What was the deal?
I don't know. But when I just let you in earlier, I just saw in our mail slot. So our mail slot is like one of those things where like it's just like a little door that the mail person can open and push the letters through.
Right.
I just saw a lollipop stick sitting in the little groove there. Oh. So
certainly you're being stalked by the lollipop killer.
Candyman.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Don't say it 2 more times. We'll keep ourselves safe.
But I think we grew up in similar contexts, just because, I don't know, rural-ish.
Yeah.
And you were near Schenectady, right?
Yeah. I was in Niskayuna, which is like a little suburb right next to Schenectady and Albany, and and Schenectady is primarily known as like a funny sounding place that people will use as punchlines, certainly vaudeville era punchlines or whatever. Yeah. And it was pretty suburban where I was, you know, and we were like, at least in my memory, a family that was like clinging on to that suburban sort of identity or lifestyle or something as a larger family. Other stuff going on too, but like, yeah. And so if you took like 30 steps in any direction, it got rural in a hurry. But it was fairly quaint. I don't know if that was like kind of your feeling growing up or something.
Yeah. And I was even thinking when you were talking about like recognizing things going on in yourself. Like I grew up in an area that was pretty repressed and a family that was pretty repressed.
Yeah.
And, it took me until therapy to start being like, oh wait, that feeling is supposed to be this emotion.
Right.
Almost like I was on the spectrum in some way.
Yeah.
But more like I was raised on the spectrum. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. No, I mean, I do find myself in therapy, you know, sometimes finding a way to ask the following question, which was, hey, tell me how a normal person would feel in this scenario. And, you know, obviously that's full of language that, you know, is a little bit like, well, we try not to say normal and we try not to say this and whatever. But it's very, and I can't tell how it's good to hear you say a similar sort of thing, you know? It was weird. You know, I had like, If it was repressed, it was like a sort of, at least on my dad's side, it was sort of I think his father had been very just closer to sort of an old school repressed men don't show emotions type thing. And my dad, I think, you know, felt the weight of that silence in a lot of, and I think his reaction to that was to be much warmer. But sometimes, you know, as happens, you know, that warmth would come with a level of like abstraction or something, just like, you know, moving it along in a generally positive area, but we're not going to get too specific and that kind of thing. Yeah. And then, you know, I had a whole other situation going on with my mom and, you know, whatever, lots of stuff. Lots of stuff to figure out in therapy.
Yeah, when you were saying that, I was thinking like my parent, like it's not like my parents are cold. They're not like I use the description. I say that we were like kind of a waspy Jewish family.
Sure,
but like waspy makes it seem. I was just watching an episode of Glow from the new season last night, where like Bash, I forget his name, also Piz from Veronica Mars.
Yes, yeah.
His mother comes to visit, and she's like a wasp, and she is cold and emotionless and hard to please. Like it's not like my parents were. It's more like their emotions were inarticulate. Like there were just like a wide swaths of feeling that weren't defined.
Sure.
And I think that's more. I think that seems more because they were like very warm and very loving people.
Right. Yeah.
Are still.
Yeah. No, I mean, I count myself very lucky that my dad was an early adopter of things like, you know, not being racist or sexist or, you know, and it was, you know, very much, I remember, you know, feeling certainly like, even as early as middle school, there was a lot of talk about like, you know, whoever you bring home when you're dating, you know, bring home a guy, you bring home a girl, you bring home whatever, just like all I hope is that they love you and, you know, that kind of stuff. So like those things were great and they got in me. But, you know, then you get into like, how are you? Okay, but how are you really? You know, every now and then it feels like we didn't get all the way to how are you really?
Yep.
You know? Yeah. It's yeah. So.
Did you ever get there? Because that's like my challenge now is how do I... Or do I? I mean, I've been struggling with this. This was like the last thing I dealt with my therapist in New York before we moved out here. And I was like, do I try to push past this to have a more adult relationship with my parents? Yeah. Or do I just enjoy the detente for the next couple decades?
Right. That's the work that I'm going through right now is, you know, it's tricky. You know, so my mother passed away about 7 years ago. So we never quite got to a place, unfortunately, where we could have the sitcom ending of like wrapping a bow and moving forward into the future and that kind of stuff, which is a regret, but there, it just, you make your peace with that kind of thing. And then, when things are, I was raised that when things are fine, they're fine. So let them be fine, and it's like, am I going to, and even also what would the shape of that conversation be? Like, I want to be able to sob on your arm and then go play ball, even though I'm 45 and you're 72 or whatever. I don't know. We have a perfectly lovely thing. And then every now and then I'm like, oh, well, how come we only talk, this amount of time each year or something, but that said, I called him on his birthday and we had a lovely little chat and I was like, okay, well, he's given up more than he did in the last call. Maybe we're just heading in that direction and maybe it'll happen organically without too much like, tearing of garments and weeping.
Yeah, that's my hope. But also I'm genuinely scared of what the relationship looks like on the other side of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, the thing I talk about in therapy about it is like, am I, by opening up that box, by starting those conversations, am I like accidentally or on purpose making like a subtle promise that the whatever drama or pain comes out of a clearing of the air or something will ultimately be worth it, and that we'll be closer at the end of it than we were in the short term. And until I can either make that promise and hold to it, or until I can say the thing that I also always am told in therapy, which is that sometimes if there's a thing you need to say, maybe what you're saying is I need to say this and I don't necessarily need to hear anything back. Whereas, I don't want to find myself in a place where like I am saying X to get Y reaction, and make sure that like I'm crafting a new relationship as opposed to like, hey, this is a thing that I've always wanted to say, and how do you feel about that? Or also, don't say anything right now and just let me talk about it. And it's complicated. And then it also, life is happening at light speed all the time, all around you, and it's like, okay, do I have a couple of weeks to just like sit and think about like, why did we play Frisbee instead of baseball growing up, and whatever. So I get it. It's really tricky.
I mean, it's also like the other thing I thought was the journey to become a TV writer. When I was in Pennsylvania growing up, I say this on the show all the time, but like I didn't know it was a job. First of all, I didn't know when I was writing sketches with my friends when I was like 8 years old, or like making little videos with them, in high school, and being like, oh, this is fun. This is great. But I didn't even, like I was about to just say, but this couldn't be a job, could it? Like it didn't even occur to me that there was an occupation from where I was. Like I had, before I looked you up online last night, I just assumed that you had gone like the traditional path. Like you went to Harvard and then you did so, which you didn't.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious about like, how did you, if we have the same kind of emotional background,
right?
And also like same kind of geographic-ish context, how did you get the notion that was a thing you wanted to pursue?
Yeah.
Is it also like, I guess piggybacking on top of that, how did you get the notion is it besides a job, do you find it a calling? That's a tough one.
That's a tough one. I don't, the closest I can get to calling it a calling is like, I knew somewhat early on that it was the thing that I kept coming back to as a way that I wanted to spend my life. Like I was always like thinking in the terms of like, oh, this would have been a funny scene in the movie we just saw, or this would have been a good scene, or I wish that this had happened, or that kind of thing. So my parents were, to varying degrees, they both had, my mom and my dad both had creative impulses that they didn't get to be their careers. Mm-hmm. My father, as long as I was growing up, he was always in the process of like writing a book, and in his terms, it was going to be like a book that was both very funny and reinventing math. And that was just like a thing that he was like, people don't think of zero the right way. We have to make them think of zero in this other way. And I was like, oh, that's okay. I don't think all the other dads are talking about zero, like when they all hang out with each other. It's like kind of interesting. And then my mom, she went to Emerson, and she was an actress in that theater program. And, you know, in my grandparents' house over the couch, there were like 8 framed black and white photos of her in various performances. And that was always sort of like loomed over me as like a thing, like, oh, okay, the arts are like somewhat viable as an idea anyway. And then, you know, when she came out of school, you know, she ultimately became a teacher, which her mom had been. And then also, even when I would like show an inkling that I was excited about these things, about writing, you know, like you said, like putting on plays for the family and, you know, all that kind of stuff, writing short stories, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You know, when it came time to like leave high school and go into college, you know, they were pretty adamant, I think, as, you know, it just didn't seem realistic to, you know, leave, you know, the Albany area and expect to launch into show business in any way. We didn't know anybody in that world. There were certainly, my grades were not such that Harvard was on the horizon. So the deal that they made with me was like, you know, when you go off to school, you're welcome to think about this stuff in your free time, but you should go to school for something that you can be when life tells you that that's what you have to be. Mm-hmm. And I, you know, at the time, you know, it was not, I was never like a great student anyway. I did have my head in the clouds, you know, and I wasn't good at studying, and I wasn't, you know, I didn't have any of that stuff. Yeah. So like, and I remember, you know, I blocked out big chunks of my childhood. So who knows what I thought about, you know, up and through middle school or whatever. But the, you know, I always got mad in high school, especially in like creative writing classes or something, which was like, I would submit work and I would get like a B or something like that. And I remember being very angry that like I couldn't test this story on the open marketplace, that I had just like one boss who was my English teacher at the time, and that I couldn't. So I was always like weirdly thinking in those terms about like, oh, there is sort of an industry out there. But, and also growing up, like my parents were supportive to some degree. I mean, this was like pre-internet era. So like, even like if you wanted to see what a script for a movie or TV show looked like, you had to like find the ad in the back of Premiere Magazine, and mm-hmm. you had to write a check and send it to Script City, and it would come back, and that was my film school. That was just, I would like study those scripts and say, oh, that's where they use capital letters, or, you know, whatever. And so I was doing all of those sorts of things. And then when I went to school, I went to sort of a state school about an hour and a half from where I lived, and you know, and studied to be a teacher, but then, you know, worked at the TV station on campus and tried to make something out of that. And then it wasn't until like, you know, we sort of won the show that we did, which was, you know, no offense to anyone, but terrible, just like terrible college humor or whatever. But we won like a National Association of College Broadcasters Award, and ended up calling Comedy Central to just see, and Comedy Central wasn't even barely Comedy Central at the time. Comedy Central I think had just been born out of like the Comedy Channel and Ha. It was like, you know, 2 networks that were slowly forming into one.
So it was like, what was that show Maron hosted where it was
like half hour, comedy hour, like that, or short attention span.
Short attention span theater. Yeah.
Like that era, pre-Daily Show, pre-South Park, whatever. And so I ended up, and so they just in this dumb conversation where I talked to them, they were like, who are you? Why are you calling or whatever? And then they said, well, if you want to send us your show, Comedy Central had given the award. Whoever knows that, it could have been like, you know, literally a person who delivers water bottles to Comedy Central could have been the one who chose the award. But so we won this award. They said, oh, send us your show. And I knew as I was like sealing the envelope to send them an episode of our show. I was like, oh, this is terrible. They're going to think it's terrible. And this will be the end of the conversation. And so I unsealed it and I inserted a letter that was like, oh, and by the way, like, there's no reason that Comedy Central couldn't have a nationwide, the best of college comedy show. And if you ever were interested in that, I would love to like help coordinate that and, whatever. So I sent it off. And then like a couple weeks later, they said, yeah, your show's bad. But this other thing's interesting. Do you want to talk about that? And I said, sure. So we went around on that for a couple weeks. And then after that, the woman I'd been speaking to, she said, okay, well, a new regime came in and they've killed everything because, and we're going to move in a new direction, but you seem cool. Do you want to come have an internship at Comedy Central? And so I was like, yeah, great. So I told, I had been student teaching at the time, and I informed them, no, I'm going to go to New York City. See you later, suckers. And even to the point where like they, lovely, lovely teachers put their arm around me and brought me to the window, and we looked out together, and they were like, I know that like showbiz seems fun and seems nice, but these kids need you. They need you. And I was like, yeah, I don't care. I'll see you later. I'm out of here.
Also, please don't call us suckers.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So off I went. And then I showed up for the internship and I was like, hey, I'm here for my first day. And I gave the name of the person I'd been talking to who gave me the internship. And then they said, no one by that name works here.
This is like a ghost story?
Yeah. And so I was like, what are you talking about? I moved here. I'm supposed to have an internship. And they're like, hold on. And it was like that the regime changed. They had wiped out everyone who I had ever met or talked to. But here I was on their doorstep, assuming that I had gotten an internship. And so they was like, all right, wait in the hall. And so they went in and they had a discussion and I guess, decided that I wasn't going to be a crazy person or something. And they said, all right, well, fine, you could be an intern. And so, it sort of took off from there. But, I've been lucky or I guess also privileged at various points to have things kind of people take pity on me or something.
But here, one other thing though I noticed. Yeah. And here's where our paths diverge a little, either emotional and certainly professional, but like the idea of having the wherewithal, like, all right, you got this award. We're going to send it to them and call them. Yeah. So those were the days where you could just like pick up a phone book and Comedy Central was listed in the phone book.
Yeah. I would call information and I'd say I need to talk to Viacom.
The amount of detective work I have to do to find someone's publicist or manager is so deep. Is that the correct adjective? And there was a day where like Comedy Central was just listed in a phone book.
That was a great day.
The white pages.
I used to do that all the time. When I was in, I don't know, because I'm not a confident person by any stretch in any arena at all. And yet, like when I was in high school, I was so excited by the fact that you could get these phone numbers. I would just do it all the time. I would call Marvel Comics and I would just say, hey, this is Josh Siegal. Anyway, I have a couple pitches and, if you're ever in the mood for new writers, I'd love a call back. Here's my number. Thanks a lot. And you'd get a call back. They would say like, who is this? And I'd say, oh, it's just an aspiring writer, and I got your phone number, and I thought maybe I could pitch you something. And you get a lot of no's, and you submit, and you get a lot of like no, but with the little note attached to the letter where it's like, hey, great try, we'd love to talk to you again, like that kind of thing. And those would be like the things that would keep me going and made me feel like, all right, I'm outside of this world, but I can see through this invisible shield into it, and maybe there's hope to get in there.
I mean, okay, so besides the wherewithal of like knowing like, oh, maybe this is an actual next step, I was blithely unaware of everything. I like to keep updating where I finally got some kind of like, I've left the Garden of Eden knowledge about this business.
Yeah.
And now my new date is earlier this year, is somehow where I've finally figured, I'm like, oh, okay, so these are the dynamics these are the attractors in the system of show business. And now I understand how this works. And then whatever, when I learn something new, I'll update that one. But like, let's say in general, blithely unaware of how any of this stuff worked or that I had any agency in the first place. Early 30s, I would say.
Sure.
I think there is something interesting about the fact that you had the wherewithal to like be like, oh, well, this could be a next step. Like you had maybe wherewithal is the wrong word, but like imagination or the thought that there's a possibility there.
Yeah.
To include a letter. Oh, and by the way, to call Marvel Comics and be like, hey, what if Silver Surfer left Earth? I don't know. He's been trapped on Earth for decades. What if, the fact that you had, I'll call it confidence. Maybe you want to call it chutzpah or some kind of intertwined DNA-ish mix of those two things.
Yeah.
Because certainly like a no, still a maybe. I'm trying to find a manager right now, and a maybe stings.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, and I think I had the benefit of a couple things. One was, I think any like confidence I had truly came from having nothing to lose at all. I wasn't near the people. I was in upstate New York. Marvel Comics was in New York City, which I had seen in Ghostbusters, but that was like the entirety of my knowledge about it. And, it just felt like, oh, this is worst case scenario. This is a prank call and that's fine. It ends there. They don't know who I am. They're not going to come be mad that they wasted the 10 seconds to listen to or whatever. And then the other benefit I had was that like, and this dates me and pretty significantly, but it was like the early days of like AOL. Mm-hmm. And that to me, when it was happening, it did feel like all of a sudden there was a barrier that had been ripped down. And comics, weirdly, I grew up like comic book nerd when that meant something. Mm-hmm. And now I've been like out nerded by the entire universe because now it's just, it is pop culture or whatever.
Pre-Seth Cohen. That's the demarcating line I take.
And comics always weirdly was like those creators were right there. They were one, chat message away from answering your thing, and they all weirdly would be kind of open-minded. A bunch of like people were really lovely to me in that world. I don't know. Mark Waid was very nice to me. Joe Kelly and like a bunch of these other people were just like, yeah, okay, you got ideas. That's kind of how I came up too. Like I'll listen. And it never like turned into like a paid gig or anything, but it just kept chipping away at this idea that like the creators of these things were like wildly different than me. And I knew I was never going to be like call up Steven Spielberg and suddenly be Steven Spielberg, but like, it was like, okay, there it's not as far away as it might have seemed. And that just gave me, and again, I just didn't think anything could happen that was bad in terms of just these. I was, very polite.
Sure.
Yeah. So and now that I like live in these arenas, like I'd certainly, the second you have anything to lose, I got a lot less brave, as soon as I was like an intern, like, and you'd see like, at least in that era, you'd see other interns, march in and say like, I'm so funny or whatever it is, or come see my stand-up show. And then I would see before the executives would say, and I'm like, oh, but you're bad. You're very bad. Why are you so excited to let them see? And I just always had like a healthy or unhealthy sense of like, oh, you're allowed to be terrible right now, but you are terrible right now. Like, wait till you're any good before you like try and kick down this door. The closer I got to it, the more timid I got. So
yeah, but I mean that's the thing I'm trying to figure out, because like you were self-aware, I was self-aware, but self-aware in a way where I'm like, oh, this is not form. Like I grew up in a family, like I don't, my parents never like put a occupation on me, but I had the like, you know, the cosmic microwave background. Is that what it's called? You know, that there's just like, if you take the temperature of the universe, there's just a certain temperature it is, and that's called the cosmic microwave background. Okay. It just sits there kind of there.
Yeah.
That's the way my parents were, like, with, you know, it was just, there was some, they never said it, but it certainly felt like there was an expectation of like doctor, lawyer, sure. One of those classic Jewish occupations, sure. Or Jewish second generation occupation, third, right? My grandparents immigrated. My parents were the first to go to college, and then here's me, suburban Jew.
Yeah. So I think that another place where I got lucky was that, like, I don't think my parents necessarily expected me to be able to actually make it in this industry at all necessarily, but they did stop short of like having an expectation. And I don't know if part of that is because like I taught them to not have an expectation, because my grades were like not that great, and not in like that cool guy, like I worked my ass off and I still just wasn't that smart. Like that's just the end of the story. But I think everyone sort of quickly took any sort of doctor, lawyer type stuff off the table. And, you know, my parents, you know, everyone had they had their thing that they did, and if it worked, they did it for 40 years, and that was it. You know, my father worked for the state for 40 years. His father was worked for the post office and then was an art teacher. My mother taught special ed, and her mother was an elementary school teacher. There was nobody jumping to the head of the class and learning how to be a surgeon. That we just didn't have. You know, it was less expectation and more the neurotic terror of, oh no, what if nothing happens, you know, for these guys, me and my brother. And, you know, so in some ways that was freeing. In other ways it was terrifying, because, you know, it wasn't like there was some financial cushion that I could like ease back into or whatever. It was just like, you know, I'm going to take a period of time to do my best to try and become this type of person. And then also the reason I went to school the way I did was, I'll happily, you know, I still sometimes, I mean, like if I hadn't been like relatively bad at being a teacher, there would have been times in my life when I probably would have been happy to be excited. But it just so happened that like, I would be in charge of fourth graders and they would make fun of me the second that I walked to the head of the classroom. So like it wasn't really an option, even though it was supposed to be the safety option. I don't know.
Yeah. I wonder if it is just they put a financial terror into me.
Yeah.
Like, well, you know, you have to support you know, we can up through college.
Yeah.
You know, we can pay for meals and things like that.
Yeah.
But you're on your own after that. I mean, not like, look, if I completely failed, I could go live back in their house in Pennsylvania. But, you know, I'm not trying to say that they would, I would be destitute. But that's not an option that I want to exercise at any point. So there is a little bit of that kind of like fear of they also like, there's so many health problems in my family.
Yeah.
They're like, you always have to have health insurance.
Sure.
And so there was a healthy fear of like, well, what if I don't have a job what if I have a job or don't have any job, so no health insurance, or have a job that doesn't allow health insurance?
Yeah.
Like freelancing.
Yeah.
Or like waiting for your next gig or whatever, you know.
Totally.
You know, or you don't make your WGA minimums for that year or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I had that, you know, I grew up in a way that where like uncertainty was the most terrifying thing that could exist. I had a mom with some like emotional problems and some like what we think now is like some undiagnosed like schizophrenia type like that sort of area. So you know, going home for many reasons would have been like a very difficult sort of situation. But then also as it went, I don't know I don't know your background or, you know, if you know, like just being raised by someone like that, even in a larger context where there's other people trying to lend a hand and be loving and whatever, being raised by someone who is ill in that way is, you know, it does a number on you. You know, it's really complicated. And there was so much uncertainty surrounding just this because of her illness, just some of the simple facts of what life was and, you know, who was lying to her and who wasn't lying to her and, you know, like that kind of stuff. So any uncertainty to me was like, I can't do it. So I'm just going to like, you know, I'll take my shot. I'll try as hard as I can to spend a limited amount of time knocking this door over so I can sneak in. And then if it wasn't going to happen, it wasn't going to happen. But, you know, I got lucky that, I pushed on the right things in the right order and privilege and luck and all those other things kicked in.
Also, I would don't minimize because the other part I'm seeing of this as you're saying this, it sure there's luck and there's other kinds of things, but the fact that you were brave enough, because I do really think of myself, I'm being a little bit grandiose when I like say I was cowardly. Like, sure, it's like,
yeah,
but like but like definitely like it was so scary.
Yeah,
and I had no idea how even to start approaching it.
Yeah,
that I just went to stuff that was like it was all half measures. Like I think a lot about Jonathan Banks' character in Breaking Bad, where he's like, no half measures. I'm like, that was a lot of, because I went to, I'm like, okay, well, I got to do something that is, that will make my parents proud of me. Yeah. And is also like academic in some way. And I went to school for philosophy. That was the first betrayal, I think, because originally I was going to be a physicist.
Oh, wow.
And that already was like, kind of like, well, I guess a scientist is like, sure, it's good, but it's not doctor, lawyer, right? But so that was the first betrayal, and then philosophy, and then they were like, well, what are you going to do with that? And I'm like, well, I'll be a lawyer, because that they I'll
see into people's souls and I'll convince them of things. Yeah,
it was really like as universities became more corporate, all of the humanities had to justify their existence in a capitalistic kind of way. And so you couldn't just study philosophy because you were interested in meaning or culture or anything like that. It had to be a pre-law program now, because philosophy teaches logic, or some philosophy departments teach logic, mathematical logic. And you have to know that kind of stuff to understand arguments.
Right.
Which, again, as the older I get and the more I actually see how, first of all, justice works, but certainly arguments work, I'm like, how rational are we as people?
Right. Is there truly a path to us through this, or is it possible that sometimes we'll just make terrible decisions because we're hungry and we don't like the way someone's, shoulders look, whatever.
I've been thinking lately, this is an argument I had with myself in my head this morning.
Yeah, great. Love
it. I was like, I've been thinking during the first 2 some odd years of the Trump administration, I'm like, have we ever been rational? Has it always been like emotions first, and then we use rationality to justify those emotions?
Yeah.
And then this morning, I was arguing with some other person in my head, some made up person.
Yeah.
And I think I came to an understanding of, I think it was like one of the Pod Save America people. I was arguing with in my head.
Great.
And I was like, I think it's a dialectic between emotions and rationality. So it's not one or the other, but we bounce back personally and as a culture, bounce back and forth between those extremes to even different places in the middle. Mm-hmm. So sometimes an argument will convince people. Yeah. And then other times in different kinds of boundary conditions, it won't convince anyone. And you'll just have to like appeal to their emotions.
Yeah.
I think that's
great. I mean, that feels right. We've made jokes on The Good Place about like, that one of the most unlikely things it is possible to happen is someone on the internet saying, "Oh, you've convinced me I was wrong." It's just like, it does feel like in my, as I get on in years, like I have felt some sort of hardening of ideas and some an idea that like an emotional argument should be ignored because it's cheap or doesn't make enough sense or something, which has been tricky because like, I have, growing up the way I did, like everything was an emotional argument. I'm 100% shame based as a human being.
Yep.
And it's so to see now that like empathy getting knocked around when that was empathy was like that was like water to me. It was the everything that you died without it, it just has been interesting. And what I can't tell is that idea you're saying of like, has it always been a certain way or do we go back and forth? I hope we go back and forth. I hope we haven't like left emotion, and emotional arguments and kindness for its own sake and those sorts of things, in the past, but yeah, I hope we keep bouncing back and forth, I guess. Did you win the argument in your head at least? It sounds like you did, which is great.
Yeah, well, yeah. The other person evaporated at some point.
That you vanquished them. That's perfect. That's how it works.
When I was like, oh yeah, I think that's the right answer. I think I think if I was still in academia, that would be the project I would look at. How historically has rationality waxed and waned over human existence?
That's great.
But these are all half measures, right?
Sure.
And then I go to grad school and I'm like, I had a panic attack. I thought I was going to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
I got the recommendations. I took the LSATs. I sent in the forms and everything. And then I had a panic attack the day I sent the forms in that night. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to be doing this.
Yeah.
I just, it's not the thing I want to be doing. And so I'm like, well, I guess I'll go to grad school for philosophy.
Yeah.
So I do, again, half measures, because what I really want to be doing is writing comedy and making TV.
Yeah.
And that, again, I'm doing too much, like, I'm making videos on the side. I'm writing like Family Guy spec scripts on the side. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is the path I should be going. But again, too fear based to actually. So that's what I think is interesting, is that you were not fear based for whatever kinds of negative things you want to put on yourself. You were not fear. You were not living in fear.
There was a set of things that I was willing to do that did not scare me. And in hindsight, they do. I think that certainly if my son was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to call up a famous person who doesn't know me and say, hey, have you thought about like Die Hard but in a circus or whatever? Like, I would say like, oh, well no, of course not. So there really was that. And this is going to sound self-deprecating, but for myself, I really believe it to be true. The reason that there was a plan A and there was a plan B, but there was no plan C, because I didn't have a thing that I could do. Like I know people who, I mean, like yourself, the idea that you could be like, oh, maybe I'll be a physicist or something, not an option for me. Just like failed high school physics, tried my darndest, but just like my brain didn't work that way. Whereas, not even necessarily even comedy, I didn't come from like I wasn't like one of those kids who, wanted to, who listened to stand-up albums or like any of the, I just wasn't like but I loved stories and, and just always kept finding myself, back to like, having my friends over for a slumber party, and instead of like watching TV or playing D&D or something, they would just make me tell them a story, and they would like pick parts and like work their way through it. And it was just like out of my head. And that was fun for a while. And I didn't think of like monetizing it or something, but like I was definitely like, oh, this is when I light up, is that kind of thing. And, and up through like, I had this experience in high school where I entered a science fiction short story contest, and I won a complete set of space shuttle patches, and that was like super cool and fun. And then, even when that happened, I was like, oh, maybe this is what I'm going to do. And then I got called to the office, and I was like, oh, man, they must have heard about the space shuttle patches. They're going to call and congratulate me or whatever. And it turned out, no, they had thought that I had written like, screw you, C word to a bunch of parents in a newsletter that had gone home. And for some reason they thought I had done that, which, by the way, I didn't. I didn't do it. But it was always like that push and pull between like, but it always, my whole life, it was centered around like, how can I tell stories, and the comedy, for me personally, the comedy thing happened sort of by accident. But the storytelling thing was truly, it was never going to be in the cards for me to be a doctor or be a lawyer or any of those things. So I was in a tunnel. I saw what the light at the end of it was, but there was no other door out. I would stay in that space and be a teacher and would have had a lovely time and probably told my friends jokes and been totally, happy-ish or something, done the hard work of that,
yeah.
Or I would have, I got to where I am. So my limitations, I think, helped me in a nice way. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm fishing for you to say, no, you're amazing or something. I'm not. I truly believe that like, had I been a little smarter, I would have been in more trouble than what ended up happening to me, which was like, this is all I can do. The end, I can do one of these two things. That's the whole story.
I mean, tell me what you're comfortable talking about, if at all. But with your mother, how's your dad? Sorry, I'm forming this question as I'm like saying it, but like I'm trying to figure out the dynamic between you and your dad as maybe what is possibly, you said, undiagnosed schizophrenia.
Yeah.
How do you understand your mother as a child, and how's your dad kind of parent you in that context?
Well, yeah. So complicated, and the heart of every therapy session is, certainly centered around that stuff. So my parents split up when I was in first grade, and that was its own sort of like, at the time, very traumatic. And in hindsight, you look at what happens to people in the world, and you're like, for some people that's extremely traumatic. For other people, it's like, yeah, that happened, and who cares? And so and then it was sort of after that my mom sort of, I don't talk about this a lot, so I'm just going to launch into it and we'll see how I do and how much I ask you to delete afterwards. But, it was a couple years later that, her illnesses started to manifest themselves. And it was so tricky because, she, there'd be like this, there were two people that I'd be dealing with. One person was like this sarcastic and funny and loving artist, who wanted to be a songwriter and would sit us in front of the piano, would try to play something that she'd written a spec jingle for a local mall and wanted to run it by us. And as kids, we were like, I don't know, what are you talking about? Sure. Which is interesting. Oh, maybe she was doing the same thing that I ultimately ended up like, sort of just, take your shot, whatever. So she would do those sorts of things. And then there was this other person who was really in the throes of what we think now was something called, I don't even know how to pronounce it because I haven't, like, too timid to do like a deep dive about it, but it's this thing called, as far as I can tell, it's this thing she had called Capgras syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is like that you come to believe that the people around you have been replaced by duplicates who have been sent there to undermine your life and lie to you and trick you. So I had a mom who was like incredibly loving, and then I also had the same person who would say, you seem great, but I'd love to see my son again. Do you know where he is? And, so it was tough in a lot of different ways. And you'd go through like 3 days of it being extremely tough. And then you'd go through the one day where it seemed like it had subsided. And as a kid, I thought that I had, been the front lines of defending reality. And I had like talked her into not believing that silly stuff anymore. And then a day and a half later, you'd be in the same tough discussion. So, that was tricky. And then where my dad fit in, he was like loving and supportive, and he did his best to navigate her illness in the same way that everyone else was. But he was also, you know, he was part of the evil team that was allegedly undermining her. So he was dealing with it in his own way, and in some ways in a more adult way where, you know, she would be accusing him of, you know, not being who he said he was, and tricking her in this way or that way, and, you know, things that he wasn't doing. And I think, you know, we just all sort of like dealt with it to the abilities that we had at the time. You know, I think being an adult now, having been formed to some degree by that, having more, you know, again, like in pre-internet, not even Albany, I just didn't know. Nobody knew. My dad didn't know. I didn't know. Her family didn't know. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew who to talk to. The illness was so sneaky. The illness was so sneaky that it was really hard to understand how to trap it enough to get it under a professional microscope and figure out how to explain it. Plus, you know, her illness was such that she always assumed people were sneaking around behind her back and lying to her. And so to then go to the other family members and say, hey, let's sneak around behind her back so we can get her help, it felt like I was suddenly participating in the thing that she had been so afraid of. So it was just this really ugly and difficult knot that none of us could untangle. And so, you know, intellectually, it's a lot of the work of my modern life has been making peace with the ways that I attempted to help her, the ways that I was unable to help her, what in fact even could have helped, you know, all those things. And I would imagine the rest of the family has those conversations with themselves to some degree. And so, you know, I just haven't, I think things were so difficult and unpredictable and tumultuous for a 20 plus year period that, you know, she's gone now. And so it's difficult to not have her, because I still think about like sharing success with her all the time, and I just don't get to, and it's sad. But, you know, I have made my peace with the part where she's not in pain anymore. And I would imagine that many of us in her circle also feel that way, that she's not in pain anymore. And so, well, that's that, you know. And so with the larger family, I think sometimes in therapy, I'll toy with the idea of having a larger discussion about what that meant for all of us, and the ways that it made us, you know, a little bit removed from one another as a safety precaution, or as like a something that I don't even know how to put a name on it. But do we dive in and do the work of trying to make sense of what 10 and 20 and 30 years ago felt like, when and whatever you know, sneaky damage it did, or do we embrace the present and the future and love each other up in the ways that we have, and share our kids and our grandkids and have pleasant holidays and that sort of stuff. And what would be the benefit, you know, of that?
Yeah.
So it's just a thing that I wrestle with, like who's going to do the work of this, and is it worth doing? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's a very deep question, because what's on the other side of that? Is there some, you know, I blindly blunder through a lot of emotional questions without giving it that kind of concern. Like, is there a reason to bring this up? What is on the other side of this kind of opaque-ish wall? And are we fine here where we are?
Yeah.
It's very metaphorical, but
no, but it's hard. It's hard to know. And it's hard to know, certainly for a certain kind of person too. Like, you know, I know that, like, I don't know how you are in these situations, but like I can get emotional when I'm thinking about them and talking about them in the lead up to the discussion, in the discussion itself, in the fallout from it. I just know that is going to require like a tremendous amount of emotional work and exhaustion. And, you know, and then you start to wonder, like, well, life is short, and do I need to take on the part-time job of making that part of my childhood feel better, even though it is not now, you know? And I think when I'm feeling strong and I'm in therapy and I'm working with, you know, my awesome doctor person, and, you know, she would never say, yeah, but she's like, what do you think? And, you know, I try to say, it's interesting. But if I can't, it's signing on for that much work without knowing that what's on the other side of it is better than what's right now. Yeah. That's a place where I'm not brave. That is a leap of faith, and I just haven't taken it.
I mean, that's my entire life, is like fear of the, you know, fuck Kierkegaard. Like I can't deal with that leap of faith. Like I can't, I never had faith. I was raised religious, and I still am to a degree, in the sense that, like, I think the moral and ethical dimensions of Judaism are extremely important and are very much in my marrow. But the like idea of God and faith, like that, whatever that feeling is, and I talk about it sometimes on the show, but like I don't have it. Yeah. Whatever I felt like a contact feeling once when I was in the tomb of St. Francis.
Oh, wow.
And you could kind of like, everyone was so like reverent there. You could kind of like catch the energy off of them.
Yeah.
But outside of that context, I have never felt any kind of faith. I'm a very empirical person.
Okay.
And I mean, did you, like, not religious necessarily, but like, do you grow up with a feeling of, because I think maybe this is like, at the core of this kind of, again, I'm using myself as this sounding board to try to see kind of like the outline of you.
Sure.
A lot of mixed metaphors in that.
And I think we should release The Outline of You as a single. Sounds beautiful.
That's good. Sounds like a New Pornographer's song. That maybe like this, like you had to have some kind of like faith or bravery that there would be, like, that there was a better forgive this terrible language, but like a better tomorrow in some way.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to remember exactly what was going into all of it. It truly felt the same. It wasn't even bravery, so it felt like the same feeling that I felt when I would buy like a scratch-off lottery ticket, you know? And it felt like, well, all right, this costs $1. I might wish that I had this dollar later, but I'm taking a shot at having untold riches, at having not just millions, but mega millions. and worst case scenario, I'm at $1, you know? And it felt like that sort of level of like pie in the sky dreaming. It certainly was never like, as a nerd, like I did weirdly gravitate towards, I don't know when's the last time you saw Superman, the Richard Donner Superman, the movie or whatever.
Actually, a couple years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's this scene where Clark's dad is talking to him. It's right after he, he's in Smallville, and he has kicked the football into space because he's not allowed to play football. And then he runs home faster than the pickup truck with Lana in it, his best girl, and just like kind of brags about whatever, here I am. And his dad sees the whole thing and is trying to talk to him about like, why you're here. And, and says something like, Now that's Superman, obviously, right? But he says to his son, who is this alien from another world and with powers and all this stuff, he says, you know, if there's one thing I do know, it's that you are here for a reason. He says, I don't know whose reason or whatever the reason is. Maybe it's, I don't know. I'll tell you one thing. It's not for scoring touchdowns. And for whatever reason, that was as close as I got to like a lifelong mission statement of like, well, I don't think I'm here for a reason, but I'm going to, if I'm here for a reason, this is as close as I can get to it, which is that like, I enjoy this. I like this. I've gotten positive feedback from the world that this is like a thing. And so it, like even the idea of saying in this moment that I felt a calling is like, so makes me want to punch myself in the face. Like, it's so like, how dare you ever think that way about yourself, or people that talk that way about writing or whatever, because it's all just like make 'em ups and a little bit who cares. But it was in a time that was like really difficult. My childhood, storytelling and the feedback from it would be the only thing that truly gave me peace. When I would step outside myself and tell a story about other people, you know, and there'd be a bridge between my pain and the character's pain in whatever small way or big way or whatever. But that was the only time that I felt whole and complete and not chaotic in my own brain. And so I just valued that feeling so much. And, you know, there weren't a lot of, because of the nature, I think, of my mom's illness to a certain degree, there was no other safe space, for lack of a less modern sort of term. Like, you know, she thought the temple was lying to us. She thought her family was lying to us. She thought, you know, any adult friendship she had, she thought they were lying. You know, it's just like a continual slow retreat until it's just myself and my brother and my mom and sometimes my dad floating in and out or whatever. So that peace was hard to come by. And again, all of this was like, it wasn't like in that era was I like identifying, oh, you know, storytelling brings me peace or something. I wasn't. But like now that I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, that was the only time you felt like sane, you know? So yeah, it helped me just like latch onto it and, you know, never let the bone drop from my mouth, I guess, you know? And, you know, the other thing, like in terms of like organized religion and stuff, like my dad couldn't wait to, you know, not be, to not have organized religion be a part of his life. He was more than happy to like, you know, ball up a piece of bread on Passover and pop it in his mouth and just be thrilled. And he was spiritual to a certain degree, and he was believed in humanity, you know, and kindness and generosity and those sorts of things, but certainly organized religion. And my mom pushed it aside for her own, you know, very specific reasons. And so as kids, you know, we sort of watched the idea of like temple and religion fade into the distance. But then, you know, now I've been working on The Good Place for the last 4 years. And so obviously like we're not talking about religion specifically, but we're certainly talking about like spirituality and an afterlife and like all this other stuff and what it means to be good. I do find myself reflecting and saying, oh, the same thing you're saying is that that idea that they would hammer in Sunday school about like, you know, being torchbearers for a darkness that you hope never comes again, and questioning society and having charity be a part of your daily life as much as it's possible. That is deep inside me, to the point where even like there's this thing that I do that I didn't even realize I was doing it until long after I'd started doing it. But like, do you ever have that moment where you're like, I mean, I'm just like deeply uncoordinated, so I don't know if anyone else has this, but like you're walking along and you like almost trip, you know, and you like, or you'll wobble on an ankle and then, but you won't all the way go down. And I found myself saying thank you when I didn't fall down. And I don't know where that came from. And I didn't know at the time who I would be possibly saying thank you to the universe, to some figure, to something. But it did just like pour out of me sort of very naturally. And that's about as close as I can get to like, any sort of like spirituality or religion, is that I do thank the universe when I don't fall on my face, which, that's as good as it gets for me,
That actually seems like a nice place to end.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for having me. It was a blast. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye.